So did you get a chance to look at the
Yeah,
questions?
I had a chance to look them over briefly. I'm a pretty off-the-cuff guy, you know. I don't really rehearse much. I just kind of,
Yeah.
I'm pretty consistent in my responses to things.
I'm going to move mine a little closer because I don't want to do the zoom thing because picture quality. That is pretty good. All right.
So where are you going to put this?
Well, it's for the Observer, so it's two things. I actually just created a YouTube channel for the Observer. I'm kind of just starting to kind of help out there.
So these will be up on their YouTube channel. That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
And then we're going to do. We're still figuring out for the print. It's either going to be little blurbs for each candidate, or well, probably little blurbs, and then we'll sort of link people to the videos online. So.
Yeah, in the interest of saving print space, I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, just a lot of candidates. So. Okay, here we go. So let's get it cracking. Make sure I've got. Okay. So first off, so just state your name, your occupation, and how long you've been in Fullerton.
Sure. My name is Joe Imbriano, and I'm a Fullerton resident for over 20 years, and I'm a licensed insurance agent, and been with the same firm representing Mercury Insurance for over 22 years. And I'm married, father of 4, and faithfully married for 18 years.
All right. And are there any sort of community involvement in terms of groups or volunteer work or any kind of sort of community involvement that you've
Well, I'm a busy parent, and I run children through baseball and soccer. I work full-time. The real involvement that I've had in this community has been activism, and that's been going for a number of years, as you are well aware. And my focus has been on being surgical in my approach to making the most difference with my precious time that I have, and that would involve influencing councils and school boards on issues of grave concern and serious relevance to the community. I don't really get involved in the PTAs because my children are either homeschooled or private schooled. And as far as volunteering in the community, my interests have always been to really be in a hard-hitting capacity. That's where I've always felt led and called to serve.
Okay. So what do you love about Fullerton?
There's so much to answer there, Mr. Latour. You know, I have to say that I fell into this community by happenstance. I fell in love with my lovely wife back in 1997, and it's been history since then. She had a place in Fullerton, and obviously we got married and moved in together and started a family. And one of the things I've noticed about Fullerton that's really incredible is the climate. I'm an avid gardener. I love my fruit trees. I love my grapevines. I have very serious interests in agriculture and horticulture, and it's remarkable how well grapes and citrus do here. But aside from that fact, what I really love about this community is the diversity, the multiculturalism, the levels of different socioeconomic strata that coexist here, all the way from the higher echelons of academia all the way down to just your average mom and pop that I was raised by my parents. So it's a really neat community, and it has a lot of opportunity for raising a family in terms of educational opportunities. It also has a lot of opportunity in terms of nightlife, restaurants, parks, access to trails. I mean, we've got access to these wonderful parks. And, Coyote Hills. I lived next to Robert Ward Preserve for a number of years, so it's just really been a joy, aside from the fact that it's also centrally located with a train station. It's got a lot to offer.
Okay. And I guess on the flip side of that, so what do you see as some of the major problems facing Fullerton? I should ask you to be a little bit concise.
Yeah, well, I have to say that in my honest, humble opinion, I think the biggest problem facing this community has been a lack of honesty, transparency, and integrity in its government. And I believe that has spanned for decades. And I believe what is evidently clear to anyone that has a set of eyes is the condition of our infrastructure is indicative of the corruptness of our city officials for decades. And the roads are in ruin. Our infrastructure is, in my opinion, a joke. I believe they, when I say they, the institutionalized cabal that has run this town for decades into the ground, have thrown band-aids on everything just to keep us looking the other way, while the elephant in the room stands there undeterred and unbothered. The biggest problem we have is we're out of money, and that's the excuse we hear, where we can only repair a mile or 2 or 3 miles of road a year. We have 300 miles of road in this town the city's responsible for, so you and I are all going to be dead along with our kids before any of that gets accomplished. And that's assuming current projections of revenue and rate of return in the market. So, you know, I've got a lot of questions as to what went down, where the money went, but we are in a dire situation with our infrastructure. And we are probably in the worst shape of most cities I drive through in Orange County, because I'm all over the place on the road during the day. I really travel a lot because of my line of work, and we've got really bad problems with traffic synchronization, road condition, and our water delivery system. So that's just the beginning of the discussion. I mean, time permitting, we could go on and talk about the condition of our parks. We could go on and talk about the pension liability, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we don't have that's owed. And I really think that with a community with such potential, it's so tragic that it's been so severely mismanaged for so long. And you see the same names on the signs, on the light poles every time an election comes up. And it behooves me as to why we continue to keep putting people in that are either those people are endorsed by or connected to those people. That's the definition of insanity, is when you expect a different result from doing the same thing. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable either, too. It's going to be like pulling a bunch of impacted wisdom teeth to make the necessary changes, unfortunately.
Okay. Next question. This one's always a little bit awkward to ask, but people like to know, who are your top campaign donors? You can answer that or not.
Well, yeah, that will be a matter of public record when I file the forms. But I will tell you that if you are concerned about who's bought and paid for, it's certainly not Joe Imbriano. Joe Imbriano is a grassroots activist, and as you will see, my campaign donors will be individuals. They will not be corporations. They will not be political action committees. They will not be the Democratic Party. They will not be the Republican Party. They will not be builders. They will not be telecom lobbyist groups or anything of the sort. My supporters will be people like you and I, Mr. Latour, people that really care about the community. And it's very difficult to raise money if you're not corrupt and if you're not bought and paid for. The big money always goes to the players, and...
Hold that thought for 1 second.
Sure.
Well, it might be kind of interesting to hear the ambient city noise, but...
Yeah, that's par for the course.
Okay. You pick up.
Yeah, so, you know, I understand there's concern over transparency over who's funding your campaign. And like I said, you'll see it's certainly not anyone you'll need to be worried about with me. And when the forms are filed, it's a matter of public record.
Okay.
And I might add, if you are concerned about really who is bought and paid for, I suggest you look at Ms. Fitzgerald, Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Bennett, even Ms. Kapinski. Those are the people that are going to have the developer money behind them. And those are the ones that are going to have the connections to what should be a concern to most people that really, truly want change.
What, in your view, is the proper role of City Council?
Well, the City Council is a governing body that controls a municipal corporation's daily operations in terms of being the line item veto or the green light on projects and financial dissemination. It has certainly evolved into something that it doesn't mirror that. It has become actually a lobbyist party, specifically Ms. Fitzgerald, who is a vice president of Kirk Pringle & Associates, who has very deep connections to developers and big money that supersedes the interests of the community. But the goal of the City Council is to represent the people and be the people's voice that put them there. If I live north of Dorothy, and I'm on the council, and there's an issue in southwest Fullerton on the border of Winter Park, required, and it is my duty to listen to those people and listen to their concerns, no matter what side of the tracks, or north or south, you live on. It is our duty to hear the concerns. It is our duty to listen to the concerns. It is our duty to put the residents' concerns above these special interests, such as the public employee unions, such as the developers, such as the political parties that have hamstringed the city government for decades. And I believe it is actually the only place where a real person that really cares about their community has any power over these entities that have brought us to the brink of ruin. It is an incredibly wonderful position that, if properly utilized, can be extremely powerful and extremely effective in improving the community and in making the community better for everyone. Unfortunately, what has happened is it's a pay-to-play game now. It takes a ton of money to break through the force field that the establishment has erected, and it has morphed into something it was never intended to be. And it is also the checks and balances that must be in place between the vested interests that work for the city, who have a vested interest in enriching themselves and propagating the betterment of their compensation plans and their retirement plans at the expense of the taxpayers and the residents who are pulling the cart, and it's really gotten out of balance. And so that's another goal, is to be a balance, if not a backstop for things to get so unbalanced that they become unsustainable, and that's where we are now. Things are really in an untenable and an unsustainable position. And unfortunately, our city council has evolved into a group of people that have kicked the can for decades and have left a pile behind a curtain that is slowly being drawn and being revealed to those that are willing to open their eyes and see it.
Okay. Do you support, this is something that's going to be on the ballot, I know it's not really a city council issue per se, but it does speak to your philosophy. Do you support at-large or district elections for Fullerton, and why?
Well, you know, Mr. Latour, I'd have to say that I'm kind of torn on this issue, because I feel that it's better for the entire community to elect all of its representatives. But at the same time, when you look at the makeup of the council over the past several decades, and when you see that the majority of the city council has lived north of Chapman, and the demographic of that council has never really matched the demographic of the community. And in my opinion, they have put their interests above the interests south of Chapman, and all you have to do is look at the condition of the roads, you can look at the condition of the sidewalks, you can look at the condition, just the general overall appearance of the area, and it makes you wonder whether maybe its time has come to have these district elections. The concern I have with district elections, obviously, is with anything that can be taken advantage of and manipulated, is it's probably going to be easier to buy the seats, because you'll have a smaller area to target, and the big money can really stomp out the little guy. But conversely, maybe the little guy may be able to have a better shot if the little guy or the gal is willing to be the boots on the ground and really make it happen. It's sad that we're forced by edict to have to come to this. I think district elections tend to be a bit divisive. It balkanizes the community instead of galvanizing the community. I think as one, we're stronger. And as we get into these factions, and as they're drawn by economic, not so much economic, but more socioeconomic and ethnic criteria, it tends to have a destabilizing effect on a community. And that's sad, because the United States is really an amalgamation of all walks and all talks and all ethnicities that have come into this place and worked together to make it what it is. I guess it's an inevitability at this point, because of the dynamics of the media and the academic system that's instilled this balkanization amongst most of the population. But there's good and bad in it. I oppose the map that they drew, because that's the other concern I have with this, is like, as I said, with anything, the potential for it to be taken advantage of. They rigged it. keep their seats for another couple of years. They rigged it to keep people out that are up for the school boards. I watched how that went down. So, in that sense, you know, I don't believe the maps were drawn fairly, and I think in this last council decision on the maps, I think it was evidently clear that we've been sold out by all of them. All of them. Jan Flory, Jennifer Fitzgerald, Greg Seymour, Doug Chafee, and Bruce Whitaker. They all voted for the wrong map. So,
Okay. So, what are your thoughts on the development of Cowdy Hills?
that's a great question, Mr. Latour. And I have to tell you, I directly abutted the Robert Ward Nature Preserve. I had a property on Avenida del Corto for a number of years, and I would go for walks on that property with my children. I even had rattlesnakes coming into my backyard, sometimes in my garage. It's kind of scary. I love open space, and I'll tell you, some of the best summer nights I had were sitting in the backyard with my wife, and that cool breeze would come down off those hills. It was really something. The air quality was incredible at night. Didn't need an air conditioner hardly ever. And it was wonderful that Mr. Ward preserved what he was able to preserve. I find it rather odd, if not disturbing, that the city council actually had the audacity, if not the gall, to change the zoning of that property from oil and gas to residential, in spite of the will of the residents and the voters. I think it was close to 63% that wanted that preserved. It has always been my contention that 95% of the United States is rural open space as we speak. That's a fact that is documented by the Census Department. So 95% of the United States is rural open space. With that being said, Orange County is probably one of the most densely populated counties in the country. So it only logically follows that if we do have a vast expanse of land that has remained uninhabited for a reason, that we should probably look at preserving it as such. Now, the only way that I would see that being the case is if the city council really objectively looked at what Coyote Hills is. It's an oil field and a gas field with uncapped wells, with unremediated soil on a fault line. And right now it's inhabited by owls and rattlesnakes and rats and mice. But it's got some nice trails. It's got some really nice wild fennel that grows when it rains. It's got some nice cactus pears if you have the right gloves and you go in there and pick them and eat them. But for the most part, in its present condition, based on the current remediation that's been done thus far, which is virtually non-existent, it is not safe to build homes on. So it would make perfect sense to anyone that's logical that it is a lot less expensive to acquire that property if it's zoned oil and gas than if it's zoned residential. And if the city officials were really acting in the best interest of the community, and never mind the property rights argument, because let me tell you something, this is not 1812 anymore. We don't run around zoning farms to residential just because we feel like putting 100 homes here. We cannot be changing zoning just for the sake of making an instant gold mine out of a dump. And that's exactly what I believe has been done. I believe that that's precisely what Chevron has successfully lobbied for and has accomplished. There is no reason why the city should not have been able to afford to buy that property all these years. I mean, there was a moratorium back in the 70s prior to the Arab oil embargo. The city actually had a moratorium on development there. There were plans to preserve the whole thing. I know this for a fact. I've done the research. And so you'd think such a long-term plan would have been handled in such a way that it could have become a reality and come to fruition decades later with proper planning. But what we have is, once again, a prime example of how the city has mismanaged its funds, mismanaged its budget, and mismanaged its resources, its natural resources. That thing should have been posed for a park decades ago, and the zoning should have been off limits as far as the zone change. So my position is that we need a central park. New York City has one, and by golly, by the grace of God, those people had some foresight back in the day before that thing turned into the metropolis that it did. And do you think Orange County, with its climate, with its burgeoning population with its technology and with the brilliant minds that are being turned out of our schools here isn't going to become a burgeoning metropolis someday, then I think you need your head examined. Because this place will eventually. And we are out of land here. And people need a place. People need a respite. People need an escape from this concrete jungle. And quite frankly, that's probably the last place left for a long ways around. I mean, you could go to Carbon Canyon, you could go to the Cleveland, but that's not walking distance from a bunch of homes. It's not a bike ride way. We've got all these trails that are connected to it. So I really think they committed high treason against the taxpayers by rezoning that property residential. And then to add insult to injury, we had people like Jan Flory and Doug Chafee turn their backs on the will of the people and vote for that development plan. I don't care if they said it was better than the first one. They should have said, hey, wait a minute. I'm not changing the zoning on this. They went ahead and changed the zoning on it. They greased the skids for this whole thing. So that was a tragic mistake. I think it was in a good holding pattern, and with the right guidance and the right air traffic controller, it could have been brought in for proper landing, because it would have been 10 cents on the dollar price-wise, and the grant funding's out there for this kind of stuff. And I believe, now, can we change the zoning on this with a new council? You know, I don't know. I haven't done the legal research on that, but that would be one of my priorities, is to investigate that.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the Fox Theater restoration? I know it's not really under the purview of council per se, but you know, people want to know and are concerned about it. It's taking a long time. Like, any thoughts on the Fox?
Yeah, you know, Mr. Latour, I'll give you just a real brief history into how I got into doing what I'm doing. I grew up hanging out down at the beach when I was a kid. We used to go fishing. I used to love fishing on the pier, fishing on the rocks. The folks would take me down there. We'd have a blast. It was just a wonderful family experience. Well, you know, back in the early 90s, City of Newport Beach cooked up this little scheme to get rid of the fishermen. And what they did is they called off the maintenance, they called off the law enforcement, and they let the piers become a disaster. Fish guts, trash everywhere, people out there smoking dope and drinking and throwing crap everywhere. And so what do? They come back and say, whoa, we've got a problem. We need a solution. So they create the problem, and they create the solution. And the solution was a draconian measure to ban fishing, which was actually tied into a real estate development scam where they were going to put high-rise housing on the peninsula, 300 domain, tear down a bunch of houses. And part of that involved getting rid of the minorities, getting rid of the lower socioeconomic strata that was infesting their piers, so to speak. And they were going to take the parking out on the peninsula, and they had some coastal access issues when it came to that. So, you know, I was heavily involved with the Coastal Commission and lobbied the city, successfully had threatened the city, beat them back, had their ordinance pretty much turned into a useless piece of paper, as I had threatened the city with a Thailand grant revocation, which would have turned Newport Beach into a state beach because their ordinance violated a provision of their Thailand grant, which is somewhat similar to what's going on with the Bray Dam thing, in my opinion. So there's some vulnerabilities there. That's a different discussion. But I bring this up because what's going on at the Fox Theater reeks of the same problem. It's letting this thing run itself into the ground. It's city-owned property. It's sitting idle for, what, a decade now, in the hands of, I believe, Mr. Leyland Wilson. And what do we have to show for all of this money that's being poured into this white elephant? Absolutely nothing but maybe a parking lot that we can use for functions at some time. So my position on the Fox is that we need to disband who is holding it, the entity that's holding it hostage, or get it out of the clutches of this group, and get that thing R&R'd real fast, and let's get some entertainment venues in there, whether they be Frank Sinatra orchestras or you know, Jackson Brown type venues. I mean, we have a diverse culture in this community, and I believe they're entitled to entertainment that fits their forte. And it's certainly not the case now. So that property is another gem which I believe has been seriously mismanaged. And I believe it's been seriously mismanaged intentionally, because I think ultimately the plan is to turn that property into a high-rise something. And the justification will be, let's start working around that property and let's build a parking structure and let's jackhammer enough to where it starts to weaken or destroy the structure, and then it ends up being condemned, and then it has to be raised and replaced. I think that's actually where they were trying to go with the most recent action at the council. So it's being held hostage, and I propose to liberate it for the benefit of the community.
How is Fullerton doing on the issue of
monstrosities that are $3 grand a month. That's pretty chic. They got no parking. They're for people that don't exist, in my opinion. And since the housing has been commoditized by these artificially low interest rates, you've got the median price pushing 600,000. So do the math: 120,000 down, $4 grand a month for 30 years. Everyone's got 120 grand in their back pocket, right? No, 50 grand down with PMI gets you 4,500, whatever the case may be. Housing has become out of reach for most people. Now, with that being said, what is the solution? Well, it certainly isn't the solution that has been proposed by the city, and that is to have these properties erected 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 stories tall, and have these above market rents. Affordable housing is accomplished by the following. Affordable housing is accomplished by the market controlling itself. And there is affordable housing in Fullerton right now to some extent. And that is, there are rental properties available. There are granny units available. There are plenty of apartments that are available. The vacancy rate in this city is nowhere approaching 100% saturation. So I believe the market forces that are at work in this community right now are doing a fine job. I know that I cannot afford to live on Lido Island. I've come to grips with that, Mr. Latour, and I think many people in this community have too. That's why they're living here. Now, if I felt I was entitled to live on Lido Island, then maybe living on Lido Island wouldn't be so great anymore, because it's going to change the character of the neighborhood and the quality of life that those people perceive they're entitled to. I can tell you right now, I could move to Tennessee and live like someone who's living on Lido Island. I could buy myself a mansion with a bunch of horses. It's all relative. So, affordable housing is available. It's just not available here. Is it the city's duty to provide it? I think the more the city tries to get involved in providing affordable housing, the more they screw it up. The more they try to give us affordable housing, the more they gobble up businesses that are trying to provide jobs for people to afford to live here. Case in point, I know there's a project going in over on Raymond and Orangesthorpe, and that's going to knock out an auto repair shop and another auto repair shop and a roofing company. And so you're going to have 20 people out of work, and there goes that man's dream of sending his kids to college. And what they're going to do is they're going to move in 20 or 30 units on that property, and the government's going to subsidize it. And those people, they're going to have a nice chance of living in a nice neighborhood, but is that really a great place to live over there in that industrial area just down the street from all the strip clubs? I mean, really, is that something that they should be sandwiched between the freeway and the railroad tracks? I don't know, but all I could say is that housing is something that needs to be left alone, and the private sector does a great job of building housing units where it deems that they're necessary. Market conditions will always control the construction. When you get the government involved in subsidizing things, you end up creating a far bigger problem than you started with. And with all this high density and all this push to bring in all these units, it actually puts upward pressure on rents, because then it commoditizes the single-family units that have yards, and it increases the desirability relative to the newly produced homes. So that's a whole different issue. And I feel that the affordable housing issue cannot be solved with the current plans that we're undertaking right now.
Okay.
Mr. Tor, can I stop this real quick? I just want to check mine.
Yeah.
See what the time is on here. Yeah, it's a good thing I did. Okay, let me reset.